Rolling. Linda, hi.
Hi, Nathan.
Welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
You are listening to the Leadership Vision podcast, sharing our expertise in the discovery, practice, and implementation of a strengths-based approach to people, teams, and culture. For more information about developing your strengths, the strengths of your team, or the strengths of your entire organization, click the link in the show notes or visit us on the web at leadershipvisionconsulting.com. Hello, everyone. It's Nathan Freeberg, and I don't know if you watched the presidential inauguration this past week, but something that really stuck out to me and struck me was how much imagery there's involved in our American political landscape. I mean, from symbols and the image of the people lined up in a certain way and past presidents being there and the different salutes and everything else, the whole experience is just rife with all kinds of imagery. And that's really cool because it symbolizes different things. Well, at Leadership Vision, we also use imagery in a lot of really cool ways. If you go to our website, the image that you see, the first image on our website, was actually something that we had commissioned by a local artist in Minneapolis, and it means something. If you ever go through one of our in-person experiences, we'll actually use that as a teaching tool, along with several other images in this series that this person did to teach different aspects of our philosophy. The top of every blog post that we write and podcast we produce has a very specifically chosen image that is representative of something that we want to communicate. And then, of course, you've probably heard us talk about images as we do our 360 process and the one-to-one conversations, and we draw these images for people and for teams to help represent, at least in our mind at that moment in time, perhaps how these strengths are working together. Because images are powerful. Images represent things, and sometimes even physical images, physical objects, like, for instance, this little Lego minifig that I've got here that if you're listening to this, you can't see, but it's this pirate guy. And I keep this in my office with me because it reminds me of my son, of a Halloween costume that when he was very young, some Lego things that we have built, and it represents a bunch of things I'm not going to get into because it'll take forever. But the conversation, the podcast, what you're about to see or listen to is actually something that we did back in 2017 where we were talking about images. We were talking about the power of images. It's between myself and Dr. Linda Schubring, who is our vice president. And this podcast episode talks about the power of images, the power of finding objects, and how you can use that to get to know your strengths a little bit more, to get to know the strengths of other people on your team, and maybe as a larger organization. And so we talk about that, but we also give you a very helpful, a very practical, a very doable right now activity that I would challenge you and encourage you to do with your team. Maybe it's virtual, since a lot of us are working virtually right now, but it's basically grown-up show and tell. And it'll be all explained in the episode. But I challenge you to do it, and then let us know how it goes. You can send me an email, nathan@leadershipvisionconsulting.com, or leave us a comment in this blog post or put something on their social media, and just tell us how it went, because it's very powerful. It's a way to really connect with people. It's perhaps a way to tell others, to explain your strengths to people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So give this a listen, give us some feedback, and we're just really excited to share this with you. Enjoy. To start this off, why? Why are images important to us?
Because we have found that visuals work.
They do.
Our brains are wired for it. Our clients remember the story. They remember the picture. They don't necessarily remember the words that go around it, but that there was something that lodged in their brain, and it helps us process information in a different way. That's why our company is called Leadership Vision. We are inviting people to take responsibility for what they see from a variety of perspectives to be leaders and exude their influence that way. Right. And so we get it. We always ask the question, what do you see? What do you see?
I think images, visuals, they're also great icebreakers, right?
Yeah, and we hate icebreakers,
we
right?
do. Trust falls don't work.
But there needs to be something that breaks the ice. And for me, as long as, I have very strong connectedness, very strong individualization, empathy, if the icebreaker is meaningful, if it's going to really help people get to know each other, then I'm like, all right.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's like match elbows or...
Everybody grab hands and tie yourself into a pretzel.
We don't do the pretzels either.
No, that's awful.
We use images and
Exactly.
objects to be able to talk about strengths.
And sometimes we only have, a few hours with people.
Right.
And if we can't kind of break down whatever those presuppositions and barriers are, it doesn't matter how great the rest of our presentation is.
Right.
So images are great visual. And there's a third reason, Linda, that's probably the most important.
At Leadership Vision, we use images because they're fun. We use
Very
visuals
fun.
because they're fun. And we never find just the simple picture. We find something that tells a big story, that
Was
invites.
this the thinking man you were trying to do? Yeah.
Yes, but I didn't want to get away from the microphone.
It's okay. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes. But what we have found is that sometimes these images, sometimes objects, help people get off the page and really tell a different story.
Right.
And it's not just, oh, these are my strengths, but okay, no, tell me a little bit more about you.
Yeah. People start laughing. People start crying. Speaking of fun, in December,
Very smooth.
You led us through a really cool object activity that was pretty profound, as well as it was very complicated though. So one of the main things that I want you to explain for us and for our listeners and viewers at home to get out of this is, how do you set up an activity where people can use images or objects to understand strengths? And again, this is pretty complicated, so I'm going to need you to
talk slow
and good steps.
It's called show and tell.
Oh, okay. That's my son's favorite game. He brings rocks and other way too big objects to school. Tries to. You can't bring that.
So he plays show and tell.
He does. Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He loves it.
So we know from childhood that show and tell works. It gives a child the first opportunity to practice their presenting skills, their speaking skills, but also it gives us an insight into someone's perspective or the meaning that someone puts in an object that then can tell a story. So the big complicated thing that I took our team through was grown-up show and tell. Okay. And I invited each participant to bring an object that would fit in their hand that told the story, that answered the question, why leadership vision? And so everyone did it, and everyone did it a little bit different. And as the facilitator of the icebreaker or the opening activity, that I went first. I went first by way of, this is what it's like for timing. This is what it's meant to do. It tells a deeper story. I shared some things that I had never shared with the team before, and it gave other people some insight in where I was coming from. Or, I brought a light bulb. Yeah. You remember?
I do. You talked about lighting up rooms with your personality.
Yeah, and I used to be ashamed of that.
Right.
And there was a mentor that just said to me, my maiden name, Hartzell, he's like, Hartzell, you light up a room. I was like, I'm sorry, I'll never do that again.
Turn it off.
And he said, no, that's your gift.
That's what you should be doing, yeah.
And he invited me to step into my strengths. Later on, I learned that was connectedness and individualization and empathy. And when I come into spaces, I fill it up with my adaptability. Who do I need to connect to? How do I tell that story? And this mentor of mine encouraged me to not be ashamed of it, but to really step into my light. So that's why I brought a light bulb. Do you remember what you brought?
I brought a race medal.
For a marathon,
it was from a marathon. We ran a marathon together. And what was cool even as I was telling this story about why this medal represented why leadership vision, answering that question, I found myself, well, one, getting very emotional, but two, just kind of naturally talking about my strengths without necessarily naming, oh, this is my futuristic, this is my ideation. But it helped me articulate in front of 10 other people some of the reasons why I am where I am, why I do what I do, all through this object that I thought was just going to be a quick 2-minute, oh, here's this race medal, it means this.
Right. Because it taps into something deeper.
It does. Right? It does.
Where you're at emotionally, where you're at, where your mind is at, your life stage, whatever's going on.
Well, I think going back to what we said earlier about, that icebreaker, it's a way to, in some ways, even though you're talking about yourself, to take the focus off of yourself and almost talk about yourself in the third person because you're talking about this thing or a picture. Yes. You can print something off of Google Images too and present it that way. Have you experimented with this activity outside of either Leadership Vision or kind of this professional consulting context?
I'll pick my family.
I have a good family example as well.
You do?
I do.
Why don't you tell yours then?
You want me to go first? Okay. So one Christmas, we had everybody basically go through the house and pick something that kind of tells a story of, like, how was your year? You know, a lot of families will, around Thanksgiving dinner table, be like, okay, before we eat, we're going to, you know, say something you're thankful for. So we thought we'd do it a little bit differently and, you know, pick an object. And, you know, one, it was, well, this group of adults, it was like very memorable. Like, I still remember a number of the things people picked. Two, it was kind of an icebreaker. Like, there's some members of this side of the family who I don't think I've ever had a conversation beyond the weather before.
Wow.
So it was really cool. And then it was just fun. Like, we were laughing. A couple of people cried, mostly laughing.
Yep.
It was just a powerful way. And it wasn't about strengths. It was just like sharing something a little bit more vulnerable than, oh, I'm thankful for good health or whatever. So it's a cool way to interject something that helps kind of expand the narrative and tells a bigger story of the people you're with.
Which is profound. A great, that's a huge point that we want to drive home, is you don't have to be an expert in strengths. Right. It's practicing the language of, well, what are your preferences? Mm-hmm. What items, you know, create meaning for you? And it's not necessarily like, this is my achiever, and then no, it's a ranger. No, is it achiever?
Yeah.
Instead, it's, let us know about you, and then some of the work we do is we help name it in people. Oh, maybe it's this, or even as I hear you describe that, Nathan, I'm seeing your ideation, I'm seeing your communication,
right.
I'm seeing your maximizer, right?
Because then when you can have something to connect it to, then it's a better, I mean, not better, but just a different way, a deeper way to be able to identify behaviors,
right?
And to really attach some, or you have some hooks to then attach some meaning to that as well. So for people at home. For people who are like, this sounds awesome, I want to do this.
Yep.
I joked that it was complicated before. It's super easy. But are there one or two things that you would say before you do this, make sure that you do this and this, or just ways to set it up so that it's more successful than, I don't know.
There's a few things. I think it's important to know that there's no right or wrong objects. There's probably appropriate and inappropriate objects.
Size-wise or whatever.
And it's important that you give space for people to put the spin on their own answers, to not make it prescriptive, but allow, you know, people to step into a space to tell a story that, you know, answers a prompt like, why your company, or what is something in your office that would indicate how you've navigated a change lately. And I would encourage that whoever is facilitating the exercise, that they go first and they model the way and they model the vulnerability, because oftentimes it's the person who goes first that says, okay, it's going to be like this.
Right.
We don't have to go super deep, but it's out there if you want to. Right. And then kind of lower your expectations around it and just really be open.
Right.
You know, in some of the other podcasts and summer series that, you know, I've heard things like assume positive intent. We say that all of the time. And this one is just like, stay curious, stay open.
Right. Well, that's the other part. I don't think we mentioned this, but we allowed, it was like 2 minutes of us presenting, and then 2 minutes of people could ask any question they wanted. Yes. So tell me more about this part of it. And it was cool because even that was another level of depth that we wouldn't have got to without sharing that thing.
Yep. So it created a dialogue that then helps we as adults learn, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not just one way. We don't just learn by memorizing. We don't just learn by conversation. It's the objects. It's the stories. It is the tactile nature of having an object, right?
Right. Yeah, it's beautiful and brilliant, and we should start doing more of it, I think, in our staff meetings. So here's our challenge. Every week we leave people with a challenge, and it's pretty simple. You're going to figure it out. So it's kind of 2 steps. So one is you have to pick an object, just any object, all right? That just you think kind of identifies something about you that maybe not all people know. Maybe it's like something that's misunderstood about you, or just you think, yeah, this really resonates with me. This is, this speaks to my need for parameters and wanting to be more disciplined and whatever. That's step one. And then you have to pick somebody that you want to share that with. Then if you want, like, for extra credit, you could also have them do the same thing, and then you exchange and share it together. So,
and for extra credit,
double XC.
At the end of it, pay attention to what strengths you heard.
Yes.
What strengths did you present from? What strengths did you listen with? What strengths did you notice in the person presenting?
Beautiful. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Vision podcast, where we share our expertise in the discovery, practice, and implementation of a strengths-based approach to people, teams, and culture. For more resources about developing your strengths, the strengths of your team, or the strengths of your entire organization, there's a link in the show notes, or visit us on the web, leadershipvisionconsulting.com. And if you found any sort of help from this episode or any of our other content, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a comment in iTunes, on Spotify, anywhere where you get your podcast. We're also now on YouTube. Again, there's some links in the show notes or on our website, leadershipvisionconsulting.com. We would love to hear from you. Please subscribe, and more importantly, share this with a friend. And on behalf of our entire team, thanks for listening.